In August 1977, strange things began to happen in a quiet North London suburb.
They were terrified, which is something that you can't really fake.
It got progressively more and more violent.
These unusual and sometimes terrifying happenings were to last many months and would become known as the Enfield Poltergeist.
I don't know, were we all going to die?
Matches would settle out in the box. Bed would tip on their side.
Among those who witnessed events were BBC journalists and the police.
I checked for wires under the cushion of the chair and I could find no explanation at all.
Why? Why us? Why did it happen to us? Why were we the chosen ones?
This is the strangest, weirdest story that I've ever covered.
Some of the evidence is controversial.
Just because the girls weren't actually caught red-handed in the act clearly doesn't rule out the possibility that they were down to hoaxes and trickery.
But 30 years on, it remains the most well-documented and puzzling case of its kind, and maybe the first time that a spirit voice has been captured on tape.
No 11-year-old girl could speak like that.
He didn't feel he was in control.
On the evening of the 31st of August 1977, the Hodgson family of Green Street, Enfield, were preparing for bed.
It started in the back bedroom. The chest of drawers started to shut. We could hear shuffling, and Mum came up the stairs.
She said, "No, I want you two to pack it up and stop fighting. If I have any more of it, I'm going to separate you or something."
We told her what was going on, and she see it for herself. She see the chest of drawers moving. And when she tried to push it back, she couldn't. She realised then that something wasn't right.
And I think we was awake all that night, all of us, and there was bits and bobs going on the wall, and strange little noises in the house, and no one was doing it. We couldn't make out what was going on. By the next day, my mum was exhausted. She was emotional, nearly a wreck, you know. But she held it together for us, and she said, "Oh, come on there." We got on our coats and slippers in our night clothes, and we went to my next door neighbour, Vic and Peggy Nottingham. And Vic came to the door. He said, "You all right, mate?" Because he was a big burly bloke. He used to be a builder. He weren't scared of nothing.
Vic listened to the Hodgson story and went next door to see for himself what was happening.
I went in there and I couldn't make out these noises. I went up the stairs and there was a knocking on the wall. There was a knocking in the bedroom. I passed into the next bedroom and this knocking followed me. I was beginning to get a little bit frightened, just couldn't make out what it was. And we're standing downstairs talking to the Hodgson family, and all of a sudden he knocked on the ceiling to us.
Vic was a builder, so he understood about creaking buildings and rattling drain pipes and rats and things, and he heard this knocking and agreed that it was not normal.
He said, "I can hear effing banging on that floor and we're all standing still." He said, "I don't know what to do." And he looked worried then. And I never seen a man like this big, because he was a big bloke, honestly. And looking scared.
In the end, we got on, I think they got on to the police.
The police duly arrived. There seemed no obvious cause for the strange sounds, but with youngsters living in the house, there was the possibility of a childish prank.
Well, I couldn't believe
And we explained what was going on and that, and I think the lady officer actually saw the chair move or rise.
It came off the floor, or nearly a ½ inch, I should say, and I saw it slide off to the right, about 3.5 to 4 feet before it came to rest. I checked to see whether or not it could possibly have slid along the floor. I placed a marble on the floor to see whether or not the marble would go in the same direction as the chair did, and it didn't roll at all. I checked for wires under the cushion of the chair, and I could find no explanation at all.
After about an hour, they said, well, there's nothing we can do. We've looked around, we can't find anybody outside, and we don't know if there's anything in under the house or anything. We'll have to get somebody else to investigate this, because we can't explain it, they said.
Whatever was happening at Green Street had baffled the police, Peggy Hodgson, and her neighbours.
She said, I don't know what I'm going to do, Vic. I'm going to phone the paper.
The frightened adults went ahead and called the Daily Mirror. When the reporters arrived, events were to take an even stranger turn.
I wasn't sure what was happening or what was supposed to be happening, but there is no question that things were flying around the room.
We were just literally standing there with a camera and a flash gun turned on and waiting to see what happened. And things did.
On the night of September the 4th, 1977, the news desk of the Daily Mirror received a call from two families living in Green Street, Enfield.
I used to work for the Daily Mirror as a general news photographer. I was there on duty one evening, working from I think 7 p.m. till 2 a.m.
The news desk phone kept ringing with this man up in Enfield called Vic Nottingham about some funny goings on in the house next door.
I think the crunch came when the person on the phone, the other end, said, oh, well, we've all seen this, including the police.
We drove up there in my car, the office car, parked outside, went in to the Nottingham's house.
When we arrived, the mother was horrified. Basically, she was scared.
She couldn't articulate anything. She was just in pieces, frightened and not able to be a mother to her two girls who actually needed cuddling, but she was incapable of it.
Bence, Morris and the two families went next door to see what would happen.
We were in the house waiting for whatever, to occur when the family came in. Set up, cameras ready. We had no idea what to expect.
Nothing happened. We had a cup of tea, I think, and made nice cluck-cluck pleasant noises and left. And I recall that Graham was putting his gear in the back of the car. I was just about to climb in and Vic ran out of the house, but it had started again. And we went back in, and that's when the first incident took place.
Then just things started flying around the room. It was just chaos, and people started screaming. And I just put myself back in this corner with a wide-angle lens and just kept taking pictures. I had no idea what was happening.
I couldn't see where they came from, but they certainly didn't come from the hands of the three children who were present, or Mrs. Hodgson. They came from bouncing off walls. I mean, there is no question that happened. And Graham was actually hit with one.
I got hit in the eyebrow, just in the forehead with a Lego brick.
I can remember that very well, hitting him on the head.
Which is nothing, but it's sharp, and when it's travelling that sort of speed, it certainly made a mark for a few days. Lego brick 1 minute, might be an ashtray, might be a knife and fork. And we were going around trying to put things away, put them away in drawers to stop things from flying around. And it was weird.
It was very unnerving.
It could have been over in just moments. I don't really remember. It seemed like years at the time. It just went on and on.
Bence and Morris waited until things calmed down and then left to file their report.
Graham and I sort of debriefed ourselves on the way back and just checked that we weren't kidding each other.
But when the photographs were developed the next day, they failed to show what Bence and Morris reported seeing.
It was so frustrating on that first night for things to have happened but not to be able to capture anything conclusive.
For some who have studied the case, the lack of photographic evidence points to a different explanation.
Very often, if you get independent or apparently independent witnesses reporting that they both saw something happen, then we treat that as having very high evidential value. The problem is, in the real world, if you think you've seen something very unusual, you will discuss it with each other. And one person's account is likely to influence another. So someone may have seen something vaguely out of the corner of their eye and not been sure what it was, but by the time they've finished talking to someone, they've become convinced that they actually saw a book fly off a shelf or whatever it may be.
There is no question that things were flying around the room, Lego bricks and marbles.
What we had with the Enfield case was a situation where, for whatever reason, it seemed to be notoriously difficult to actually record much of this stuff on film.
The Mirror team returned hoping to capture those elusive images, but in the days that followed, the journalists became so worried about the family that they appealed for specialist help from the Society for Psychical Research.
The Society was set up in 1882 to investigate those faculties of man, real or supposed, that are not explicable on any generally recognised hypothesis. Well, in other words, it is to look into weird things.
The present-day SPR has a wide range of membership, ranging from complete sceptics, I'm a member of the SPR myself, to, at the other extreme, people who are convinced that paranormal forces really do exist.
In 1977, the SPR had a new member, an inventor named Maurice Grosse, who had joined the society after losing his daughter in a tragic accident. When the call about Enfield came in, he jumped at the chance and headed for Green Street.
I didn't know really what to expect. I didn't know whether it was a real hoax. Perhaps the children and the mother were having a right game with the press. I thought, this is very, very unlikely. Anyway, I kept my mind fairly clear on it. I went to the house, I went in. As soon as I got in, I could see everybody was very disturbed. The children were disturbed, the mother was very disturbed, and the people from the Daily Mirror were very disturbed.
What was happening was so alien to anything else I'd seen before.
The interesting thing here was that the mother and the children had not a clue what a poltergeist was. When I first said the word, this looks like poltergeist type phenomena, they hadn't got a clue what I was talking about.
So he said, well, look, you're not on your own, Mr. Grosse said. He said, I'm going to make sure that you're not left on your own to feel frightened anymore. And she thanked him and she said, I'm sorry about it, Mr. Grosse. I just don't know what to do. She was very desperate.
Grosse was quickly convinced by the mysterious atmosphere and goings-on at the Hodgson house. After spending a few days and nights there, he felt he was in over his head and needed someone to help him deal with the situation. Guy Lyon Playfair was a writer and journalist with a background in paranormal investigation.
I thought, this sounds like the real stuff, so I thought I'd pop in once or twice and ended up staying there for 14 months.
2 weeks after the original disturbances, the investigators began camping out in the Hodgson home, convinced by now that they were dealing with a genuine poltergeist.
The word poltergeist literally means kind of noisy spirit or mischievous spirit.
Poltergeist activity is what we call psychokinetic activity.
Objects are thrown around.
Things disappearing and turning up somewhere else.
Buzzing, knocking on the walls, bangings, even to the point of earth shaking.
Things shooting around the room at colossal speed.
Smells, nasty smells.
This sometimes goes on for weeks, months, very occasionally for years.
It seems to have an intelligence, and that intelligence is destructive, mischievous.
With no intention of harming, and that if anybody is injured, it's an accident.
The phenomena starts off in a small way and builds up over time, much as it does in other areas of parapsychology. If there's the will to do it for whatever reason, you get a sort of feedback where you're creating a ghost, really.
The Daily Mirror coverage had attracted the attention of BBC Radio, who dispatched a young reporter to the house in Enfield to investigate.
It was a very light news day, and we didn't have enough stuff to fill the programme, and I was sort of threatened, if nothing else comes in, you'll have to go off on this ghost story. Well, the first night when I arrived, Maurice Grosse was there, and he explained to me what he thought was going on, and then the family went to sleep, and we waited to see if anything would happen.
Well, we've just heard a noise, having come downstairs. We've just heard a noise upstairs. And the chair, which was standing by Janet's bed, appears to have moved.
The chair's been thrown 9 feet.
Well, I'm hoping I'm not getting the microphone shaking in my hand, because that was rather an unnerving experience.
I mean, we all know kids can fake being asleep, but it didn't look like that. It looked as though she had been asleep, and suddenly something had happened.
You can look back into history, you can find that there are cases recorded from hundreds and hundreds of years ago where this kind of activity was reported.
In many cases, though not absolutely always, there is somebody in the house, usually, frequently an adolescent child, who appears to be what one calls the poltergeist centre.
Other poltergeist cases involving adolescent girls or young women include the Bell Witch in Tennessee in 1817, the Rosenheim case in Germany, and that of Virginia Campbell in Scotland in the 1960s.
I was amazed to find that it was often related to the onset of puberty, and Janet and Margaret were both at that stage in their lives.
In cases like Enfield, some parapsychologists believe that poltergeists are the spirits of the dead. Others say that the disturbances are caused by unknown energies produced by the girls themselves. Skeptics have a different take.
The focus of the activity is the troubled adolescent, but they don't tend to think anything paranormal is happening. They tend to assume that this is some kind of attention-seeking behaviour, and that essentially we're looking at hoaxes and trickery.
Whatever the explanation for what was going on, the family had taken to sleeping in the same room when, in late October 1977, activity escalated.
There's an old fireplace in the bedroom, the old type of fireplace. Jenny said to me, I can hear this scraping sound. And she said, oh my God, the fireplace is moving.
Then there was this tremendous vibrating noise. And I really thought someone was drilling a hole in the wall of the house. It was kind of very, very violent shaking. And so I tore into the bedroom, and there was already quite a commotion.
And all at once, the front of the fireplace lifted up, and it lifted right over the double bed.
And it just came out with such force. And then I think there was a pipe attached to something else, but even something as forceful as a poltergeist couldn't quite wrench that.
Well, here you have the gas fire, different parts of the gas fire. All I can tell you is it's so heavy, I can't pick it up. That's how heavy all the stuff is together.
They were heavy and they could harm us. So Mr. Grosse took it away. He took it all out. The next day it all went.
And how do you bend that pipe, let alone pull it out of the wall? I mean, the children couldn't possibly have done it. Impossible.
With no answer in sight, Grosse contacted London University, who sent a student of experimental physics to test Janet and see if she could influence metal in the same way as the celebrated spoonbender of the time, Uri Geller.
I told her what to do, that she should put her hand towards the piece of metal but not get any closer than about 6 inches away from it, and just try to make it bend. This is the record I took at the time. Within a minute and a half or so of actually starting, we begin to get the first few signals, and they're gradually increasing in size. By the end of it, she'd successfully bent the metal, and that was with no touch.
I don't know whether I felt gifted or special. I just felt like an ordinary girl, really, at that time.
Janet was extremely lively, distinctly what you might call an extrovert.
I considered to be a very intelligent child. The others were much quieter children in that respect. Margaret was rather nervous child. Janet wasn't. Janet was all for it, you see.
If Janet was the source of the energy, then the reason for the disturbances might be found in the Hodgson family and its recent history.
You never get a poltergeist happening in a perfectly happy family. So I knew before I even went there that there was going to be some kind of problem.
There's some major upheaval shortly before these phenomena occur.
Well, Mum and Dad were together when we was children, obviously, but they split up when I was about the age of 9, 10 years old.
My parents divorcing when we were so young, something there didn't help it. And it gradually, you know, it pulled it all apart, I think, really.
Life, it just didn't seem the same once Mum and Dad split up.
The father used to come to the house to hand over his maintenance money.
2 girls didn't like him. They were rather frightened of him. And he brought his girlfriend on 1 or 2 occasions, and that, of course, really upset their mother.
It was a hell of a situation. The worst type of divorce situation you could come across as far as stress was concerned.
The family was quite poor, actually, and they were doing their best to get on.
It is very difficult with one parent bringing up the children alone, not having much money, struggling to make ends meet.
She was a very brave woman, and how she was keeping that family together, I don't know.
Life wasn't getting any easier for Peggy Hodgson, and 2 months on from the first incidents, mystifying noises continued to plague the family.
It doesn't sound very odd, really, does it, to say, oh, we heard someone going knock, 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 knock on a wall, but actually it was sort of up the middle of the wall or high up.
So say the knocking is on the wall over there. You go to listen to the knocking on the wall over there, and suddenly it will come from that wall over there. And when you go to listen there, it comes from the ceiling. That's the sort of thing that happens.
It wasn't a noise that seemed, as you would if someone had a hammer and was knocking next door or was knocking on the door at any point. It was always on the walls, and it was really thumping rather than knocking. There was a lot of thumping.
The mysterious sounds were captured by TV reporter Stuart Lamont when he visited the house in Green Street.
So we conducted a couple of interviews with the girls, and in one of them I was asking them about when the phenomena began, and then suddenly, halfway through the interview, there was a loud knocking noise. I think it was 3 knocks.
Can't remember exactly what happened.
What's that knocking?
Yeah, was doing that yesterday morning, and it's doing it again now.
In the atmosphere, in the context that we were filming, of course, everyone was quiet. There was nothing going on, and people would be aware of interruptions and noise. And, of course, everyone was immediately aware that something had gone on, and nobody in that room had caused it.
I mean, I don't know whether it was caused by the family, with Janet as the main person causing it, or whether it was something else trying to get in. I have no idea. I mean, I don't even want to speculate on that. I just think it was just very, very strange, and I've never heard anything like it before or since.
If you or I kind of hear some kind of noise in our house, we don't immediately think it's a poltergeist. But once you've got this mindset that there is a poltergeist in the house, then anything, no matter how mundane, is explained in terms of the poltergeist.
The Hodgsons continued to report disturbances night after night, and by late October they seemed to be at breaking point. Maurice Gross and Guy Playfair decided to send the family away from the house. They went for a week's holiday to Clacton-on-Sea.
They went on vacation because things were getting so bad for them, I got very, very worried about them.
It was nice, a nice break. But then we knew we had to go back to reality, and what would it bring?
After a few days' break from the reported poltergeist activity in their Enfield home, the Hodgson family returned, as did the disturbances with a vengeance.
We seem to be getting a lot more happening on this case than on any other case that I've been involved in. And there were times when I wondered if it was really ever going to stop.
We could hear this knocking, it seemed all over the floor. Morris came in and he said, I wonder if it could answer me.
I challenged this knocking and I said,
did you give me 1 knock for no and 2 knocks for yes? Do you understand me? Did you die in this house?
It knocked 53 times. Then my patience gave out. I said,
are you having a game with me?
And suddenly there was a shh.
Right.
Oh, crumbs.
As I asked the question, are you having a game with me? It's through the cardboard box and the pillow right at my face.
The box from the corner of the room took off, flew across the bed and hit me on the forehead and knocked me backwards. Well, if I wanted proof, that was it. I mean, there was no better proof in the world of anything than that. This box had taken off, shot across the bed, hit me on the forehead.
Gross and Playfair were convinced that the case was genuine, but others who visited the house from the Society for Psychical Research found no evidence of paranormal activity.
In particular, Anita Gregory and John Beloff, during their stay in the house, they felt that all of the phenomena that took place were deliberate hoaxes on the part of the children.
There was a kind of opposition that went to the extreme of saying, well, we don't believe a word of it. You know, there's nothing happening, there's just a lot of hysterical people.
There have been a number of poltergeist cases believed to be deliberate hoaxes. The most famous of these is the Amityville Horror, closely followed in 1984 by that of Tina Resch, an adolescent girl from Columbus, Ohio, who seemingly faked a series of paranormal events, some of which were caught on camera.
The Enfield case, I think, is a good case where lots of people, I think, would find the evidence quite ambiguous. We can have no doubt at all that there is some deliberate hoaxing and trickery going on in this case, but the proponents who argue that it was a genuine poltergeist case will say that not all of the evidence can be explained away that way.
Children were perfectly okay. They played a few tricks which I would have been very surprised if they hadn't. And we caught them, and they knew we'd caught them, and we just didn't discuss it. No big deal.
Yes, there were times when the children played around. Of course there were. One particular time, I remember this one very vividly. I came one morning, about 8:30 in the morning, and Janet excitedly came up to me and said, "The poltergeist has pinched your tape recorder." I started to look around. I found the tape recorder. Because what Janet didn't know was the tape recorder was still running when they pinched it. And when I played it back, it said, "Oh, cool, let's play a trick on him," and we'll say the poltergeist did it. That sort of stuff.
He was on the ball with everything that happened. And he knew, in a sense, whether we were playing the odd little game and when we weren't.
But it was not all fun and games. In late November 1977, 3 months into the case, Janet produced a series of highly disturbing drawings. Meanwhile, her behaviour began to give serious cause for concern.
We did have some pretty hairy moments, yes. I think when Janet was having these kind of trance fits, rather like an epileptic fit, where she would develop phenomenal strength.
When she was violent, Janet, she would sometimes rush across the room and bash her head on the wall. And I was even frightened at one time she might kill herself.
Almost like he was possessed by an evil spirit or something, even though you don't like to think it, you know.
She seemed to be taken over. I hate to use this word possession, see, because I'm not quite sure what it means. But she seemed to be taken over And she was very angry, and she used to scream and shout and swear, and we used to have to physically restrain her.
On the 26th of November, a doctor came to the house and injected Janet with 10 milligrams of Valium in an effort to sedate her.
I can actually remember when I found myself on the radiogram in the bedroom, on top of a chest of drawers, I think, and I was screaming, how did I get there, how did I get there, you know, and I think my uncle John came into the bedroom.
There she is, across this radio, one leg in the air, and her head hanging down.
Janet's restlessness continued with the most intense activity taking place at night. One of the most disturbing episodes was captured on tape by Maurice Gross.
Janet's asleep, and suddenly she's being dragged out of bed. She's dragged to the door opens on its own. She goes through the door, and we heard the commotion upstairs. We rushed up the stairs and caught her coming down the stairs head first.
Janet, where is she? I've tried to get out of the room and I couldn't.
Tell me what happened.
I was in bed asleep. All of a sudden I felt something pull me by the arms out of bed. The door opened and I went out the door and I come flying downstairs.
In an effort to understand what was happening to Janet, the investigators decided to ask Ian Fletcher, a fellow SPR member and a medical doctor, to hypnotize her.
I put her into a light state of hypnosis and then asked her various questions. I said to Janet, do you know who's doing all this? She said, me and my sister. And then she said, I don't know who it is. And then she told me she'd been thrown out of bed. I said, what did it feel like? Then she said, cold hands gripping her round the body. The impression I formed was, this is not fraud. She, and perhaps her sister, are doing some of these things, maybe springing out of bed, but why are they springing out of bed? Something is forcing them to do it against their will.
Janet was captured more than once on film by Graham Morris, who set up a camera that he could activate remotely when he heard noise coming from the upstairs of the house.
I think motor drives in those days were about 4 frames a second, so everything was a quarter of a second apart, and it showed Janet coming from one side of the room up and across, and then landing on the floor at the foot of her sister's bed. All the people in the know seemed to think it was levitation.
Sometimes you felt like hands or something. You felt like you were pulled out of bed.
It looked like something working outside of her, but it's working on her as well, you know. It was strange.
It's quite a frightening experience in a sense, especially when you levitated with force and not knowing where you were going to land.
It's just like an invisible person with her, helping her. I don't know.
Much of this stuff on film is open to interpretation. It could just as easily be someone leaping into the air. We know that Janet was a very athletic young girl. But we didn't actually get any kind of, convincing footage of Janet rising into the air or being thrown against a wall or any of these kind of things. What we've got is all this very ambiguous, very dodgy evidence.
The 14th of December was to be highly significant. It was both the date of Janet's first period and a day on which 2 passers-by would describe seeing events that defied belief.
When the baker's roundsman, who delivered bread next door, was coming along the road, he heard a tremendous commotion in the Hodgson house. And he looked up, the curtains had been pulled across, he looked up, and he saw Janet floating around the room in a horizontal position like this, followed by some books and toys. But at the same time, across the road, is a lollipop lady.
I saw Janet laying flat and she was floating. She was going up and down in front of the bedroom window.
And I think at one point, because I was hitting the window, they actually thought, well, I might come through the window, you know. I mean, it was quite a frightening experience, really.
I came home and I kept thinking about it and I thought to myself, well, maybe she was doing it herself. I don't know. So I came straight in, took my coat off, my hat, went straight upstairs to my own bed, laid on my own bed and tried to lift myself up horizontally, and you couldn't do it.
We know from mountains and mountains of psychological research that eyewitness testimony can be notoriously unreliable.
She was just there. She was just there in front of the window. I could see it now as plain as day.
People are absolutely convinced that they've seen really, really amazing, weird stuff, when perhaps, in fact, if we could only just replay the tape, which we can't, and see what really happened, we'd find that it wasn't quite like that.
It was with its next twist that the Enfield case would take its most eerie and controversial turn.
I was sitting in the front row there with them, and suddenly a dog barked in the room. Well, that wouldn't have been anything unusual. There'd been a dog there, but there wasn't. And I'm watching the children very carefully. They're certainly not doing that. And we decided that if it could bark, maybe it could talk. So we fixed up a microphone in their bedroom.
Testing.
They got into bed, and then I was talking to them, and suddenly the dog barked. Then I said, I challenged it to talk.
Let me hear you say my name. That's not my name. Lowest. Now, say Dr. Belloff. Come on. Come on, say it for me, Dr. Belloff. Dr. Belloff.
Now, I don't think that sounds very much like an 11-year-old girl, does it?
They were like voices. It was like it was actually speaking through me.
They were very deep voices, very gruff, very unusual, sounded very strange. So I went along to see what I could record.
Talk to Rosalind, she wants to talk to you.
Hello. Good evening. Good evening. Are there two of you there?
Yeah.
What are you called?
Tom and Dick.
And where's Harry? That's a joke, isn't it?
Before long, the voice was speaking to others and began giving clues to its identity.
Can you tell me where you are at the moment in the room?
On top of Janet.
Why do you sleep on top of Janet?
It's my bed.
Why can't Janet feel you?
I'm invisible.
Why are you invisible?
I'm a G-H-O-S-T.
I said to Janet, I think that voice is coming from you. She said, oh, no, it ain't. I said, Janet, I think it's just coming from you. She says it's not. I said, well, if it's not coming from you, where's it coming from?
Oh, I felt a lot of the time it was coming from behind me, not from me.
How do you do it, mate? Do you feel it vibrating as if it was sort of...
No, like someone
Someone
got
what?
their hand on the back of my neck like that.
There was occasions when I'm sure, thinking back, that Morris would take my mouth up or fill my mouth with water.
I got her to take some water in her mouth, taped over her mouth, and it still spoke. And then I said, all right, and I took the tape off, and she spat the water out. Now, as far as I know, there's not a ventriloquist in the world that can do that.
It was a sort of rather almost theatrical thing, growling.
How many voices are there?
600.
600 the voices.
I know the joke.
How many really are there, Margaret?
I think so far we've had 10.
3.
sensible voices.
Because the girls, particularly Janet, had slightly protruding teeth at the time, it was impossible to see anyway whether her lips were moving, so the voice seemed to be coming from the larynx.
On analysis, on an oscilloscope, you can tell exactly how the voice was made, and we found the voice was not made by the larynx, but by the false vocal fold, which is above the larynx. And you only use that if you talk like that. Well, if you talk like that for too long, you get a very bad throat, and you can do yourself permanent damage.
I did try to do the voice myself, and I managed to keep it up for a few minutes, and then I had a sore throat for 2 days afterwards.
This voice used to speak up to 3 hours, not continuously, of course, up to 3 hours at a time, without Janet showing any distress whatsoever.
Is anybody there?
No.
Who's there?
Doctor.
It was all very childish, actually. A lot of it was very childish, and there were some swear words sometimes.
Don't get annoyed, Bill. There's no need to swear.
I fucking will.
Some of the things it said were very embarrassing, you know, for instance, the swearing.
That's the fucking whole story.
It was like, in a sense, that it was angry.
54.
64.
64. Right, Bill, don't get annoyed.
Fucking this is done.
This apparent possession, this being taken over by something from outside, gives license to people to behave in ways that perhaps they really want to, but can't due to social conventions. So the idea of a teenager suddenly being able to swear, use all these obscenities, without anybody coming back and telling them that this was unacceptable, that is actually quite something.
We thought it was just Janet mucking about. And so, you know, as there was so much emphasis laid on this voice, people, well, as I say, a sort of opposition party sprang up saying this is just a load of nonsense.
I wasn't overly convinced by it, I must say. I'm sorry, I've just found that a bit... I just thought the whole thing just got a bit ridiculous after a while as well, and it was almost as if certain things were expected by the scientists and the people who were there to study it.
But just as the credibility of the voice seemed in question, it would provide startling evidence to challenge those who doubted it. The Hodgson family of Enfield were the apparent victims of a poltergeist attack. But when the children began to produce strange voices, some thought they were simply play acting. Maurice Gross believed one of the voices to be that of a discarnate spirit named Bill, and asked his son Richard, a solicitor, to interrogate it.
I'm standing outside of the room. I desperately want to see inside the room. I want to see what's happening with Janet. I want to see if her mouth is moving, what her face looks like. I thought I will look through the crack in the door. And just at that very moment, it said to me,
"Shut up, fucking door."
I'm not looking, Bill, don't worry.
I thought that's pretty impressive. I've had my mind read there, so I thought I would ask it some questions about what I thought might inform me about what a ghost was or a poltergeist was.
I want you to tell me whether you remember what happened to you when you died.
I went blind. Then I had an hemorrhage and I fell asleep and I died in a chair in a corner downstairs.
This really was undeniably an old man's voice. Certainly not the voice of an 11-year-old girl. That it actually never occurred to me in a way that this could be anything other than an old man's voice.
Some months later, Gross was contacted by Terry Wilkins, whose father Bill was buried in a nearby cemetery and had lived at the house before the Hodgsons moved in.
I had an hemorrhage and I fell asleep and I died in a chair in a corner downstairs.
Astonishingly, the voice had described the precise circumstances of Bill Wilkins' death.
But it describes exactly how
That's exactly what happened. He died in the chair, down in the living room. My mum popped out to the shop for 10 minutes. When she came back, he was dead.
Is it who it says it is, or is it some psychic joker having a game with us? And I have a strong suspicion that in poltergeist cases, we've got a psychic joker at work. It may have been Bill. Well, I don't know. It may have been Bill. According to Terry Wilkins, his son, it was his father. But how do we know it wasn't some entity impersonating his father? You see all these questions it throws up. Nothing is straightforward. God, I wish it was. Saved me a few headaches.
In July 1978, almost a year after the disturbances began, Peggy Hodgson, with the help of Gross and Playfair, had Janet admitted to the Maudsley Hospital for psychiatric testing.
I think she felt that if I went into hospital to have tests, I would benefit by, and she would benefit by knowing that I was normal. And things would die down at home.
They gave her every possible test you can think of, and they prodded her all over, and they took her brain waves and everything else. She was as normal as they come.
After 2 months in hospital, Janet returned home with a clean bill of health. Seemingly, the situation in the house had calmed down.
Like all poltergeist cases, they eventually start to diminish. And I personally, and this is my own opinion, is that they start to diminish because the stress started to reduce.
Even though they died down and they stopped, I always felt there's always something there. I don't know about now, but while Mum was there was always something there.
Peggy Hodgson continued to live in the house in Green Street until her death in 2003. Janet and Margaret have gone on to lead normal lives. In the years since the case ended, nobody has changed their account of what happened, even though some were offered money by the press to do so.
There are good, strong reasons to doubt that keep the debate going. And this will run and run. I don't think people will probably ever lose interest, but I'm also equally sure that nobody will ever come up with a definitive explanation of what went on all those years ago.
I haven't spent the last nearly 30 years thinking about this. In fact, I've tried not to think about it because I did find it very disturbing.
If it was put on, and if it was all faked, and it was cleverly manipulated, then all I can say is that family were very, very clever.
I know, from my own experiences, that it was real. And it did happen. Call me whatever you like, a prank, mad, whatever.
I would put it in the sort of middle rank of poltergeists where things move, things misbehave, things are thrown, and fairly well observed by fairly reasonable people.
I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't have seen it myself, but I don't expect anyone else to believe it just because I say so. But it did. I know what I saw, and it was weird.
This was real life mystery. Marvellous. I don't want to do it again, though, thanks. Once is enough.
They'd become part of history. Well, who knows if that wasn't what they were supposed to do? You know, I don't like to be mystical at all, but who knows whether that wasn't their destiny from the word go.
Sometimes I'm scared of the dark or I'm jumpy. And I jump even at work over the slightest thing if someone comes up behind me and they just can't make out why, and I can't tell them. Because that's what it leaves you with, this thing you've experienced, you know.
I just felt, as a person, they were to do with me. And I didn't feel in control. I felt used. I still say used.
Tomorrow night, 11:05, The Curse of the Ice Mummy, the true story of the discovery of a mummy and the subsequent deaths of those who discovered it. More from the occult next, the double life and death of a parish counsellor / occultist, Peter Solheim, sex, magic and murder. Oh, next on Film 4, a film classic, Once Upon a Time in America.